I lost everything defending my son King. My life savings, my marriage, my faith in justice. But when he slipped me a piece of cloth in prison, a scrap from the very scarf that condemned him, I discovered the most devastating truth of my life. My name is Jessica Larson. Until 2 years ago, I was the woman everyone in Willow Creek, Ohio called when they needed 3 dozen cupcakes by morning or someone to pray with their sick grandmother. For 25 years, I built my life one smile at a time, one classroom lesson, one Sunday school story, one family milestone celebrated. I had everything a woman could dream of. A cozy bakery called Sweet Haven on Main Street that smelled like cinnamon and brown butter every morning. A devoted husband named Dre who ran the hardware store next door and still kissed my forehead when he passed me the cream for my coffee after a quarter-century together. And my son King, who'd grown from a little boy fixing broken bikes in our garage to a man who could build entire houses with his own 2 hands. You think you know your family. You think you know the man who kisses you goodnight, who fathered your child, who held you through 2 miscarriages and countless midnight worries about bills and dreams and whether we were raising our boy right. You think you know these things the way you know the taste of rain, the feel of sunshine, the rhythm of your own breathing. Natural, certain, unquestionable. I was wrong about everything. The morning that shattered my world started like any other. November the 3rd, 8:15 a.m. I remember the exact time because I was piping the last swirl of buttercream onto a tray of vanilla cupcakes when the police cars screeched to a stop outside. Not just 1 or 2 patrol cars, 6 vehicles, FBI vans, state troopers, local sheriffs. They swarmed King's construction site across from the park like he'd masterminded some elaborate heist. "Mum, what's going on?" King had called me, his voice breaking with panic. I could hear chaos in the background. Men shouting, car doors slamming, the metallic click of handcuffs. "They're arresting me for embezzlement. Mom, they say I stole from the town fund. Mom, I didn't do this." Embezzlement. My son, who once skipped his senior prom to help rebuild old Mr. Patterson's barn after the storm destroyed it. Who spent every Saturday morning volunteering at the food bank sorting canned goods with the elderly ladies who still called me every single night before bed just to say goodnight, and I love you. The charges were brutal. The Community Development Fund, $1.8 million, had vanished, wired to offshore accounts that investigators traced through a maze of shell companies. The town treasurer, Elena Ruiz, had been found collapsed in her office, blood pooling beneath her head from a wound severe enough to land her in the ICU. And somehow, impossibly, my son's work scarf was found at the scene. His monogrammed scarf, the one I'd knitted him for his 25th birthday, with his initials worked in blue thread, a mother's love stitched into every row. "That scarf was stolen from my truck last month," King told me through the jail's plexiglass barrier that first evening. His orange jumpsuit hung off his shoulders, making him look small, defeated. Nothing like the confident builder I'd watched frame a house just days before. "I reported it missing to the police. Check the report, Mom, October 10th. Someone smashed my truck window in the hardware store parking lot and took my tools, my scarf, everything." But the police report had mysteriously disappeared, vanished like smoke. No record of any break-in, no evidence of any theft. Detective Sarah Klein, a woman who'd bought blueberry muffins from my bakery every Wednesday morning for 7 years, wouldn't even meet my eyes. "Evidence doesn't lie, Jessica. I'm sorry." My husband Dre had waited in the car during that first jail visit. When I climbed back in, shaking and tear-stained, his face was stone, hard, cold, already closed off. "We need to accept this, Jess," he said, his knuckles white where he gripped the steering wheel. "The proof is ironclad. Our son is guilty. He swears he's innocent. What thief doesn't?" His tone turned sharp, cutting, almost cruel. "Think about us, Jess. Our future, our retirement, everything we've worked for. We can't bankrupt ourselves trying to save someone who did this to himself." That was the first fracture in what I'd thought was a perfect marriage. The moment my husband of 27 years called our only child a thief before a single court date, before we'd even seen all the evidence, before we'd fought for him the way parents are supposed to fight. But I didn't understand it then. I was too consumed with finding a way to save King to notice that Dre had already abandoned him. Too frantic to hire a good lawyer to realize my husband was steering me toward a specific one. Too terrified of losing my boy to see I'd already lost the man sleeping beside me. The truth was hiding in plain sight, wearing the smile of the man I'd trusted with everything, sharing my bed, drinking morning coffee at my kitchen table, planning my destruction while brewing my tea and kissing my cheek goodbye. The embezzlement wasn't just about money. It was about a betrayal so profound, so complete, that even now, 2 years later, I still wake up gasping from dreams where I'm drowning in lies. But it wasn't a dream. And the piece of cloth my son slipped me 6 months into his sentence at Oak Ridge Prison, that small scrap of fabric with numbers stitched into the blue thread, would finally show me how deep the conspiracy ran, how blind I'd been, and exactly whose hands had orchestrated the destruction of everything I loved. Before the fall, before the handcuffs and the headlines and the hate mail stuffed through my bakery's door, picture Willow Creek on a perfect autumn afternoon. Population 6,500. The kind of town where the annual Harvest Festival filled the square every October, where Betty at the corner diner knew you wanted wheat toast instead of white before you even sat down, where your neighbours were your family, and your family was your whole world. Dre and I opened Sweet Haven in 1998 with a loan from my parents and more hope than sense. I was 6 months pregnant with King, and we'd spend midnight hours at our kitchen table sorting bills, my swollen feet propped on Dre's lap while he whispered, "We're not just starting a business, Jess. We're creating roots, building something that'll last." He'd kiss my belly and promise our son a legacy. The early years were brutal, flour-dusted exhaustion and razor-thin margins, but the bakery grew. Wedding cakes stacked 3 tiers high, birthday cookies for every school party, credit extended to families who needed it because that's what neighbours did. Dre's hardware store next door became the place where farmers and contractors gathered for coffee and advice. He remembered every customer's project, every family story, every small triumph. King grew up in both our worlds, stocking shelves at the hardware store before school, decorating sugar cookies after, learning that hard work and kindness were the currency that mattered. At 15, he built a garden shed in our backyard, his hands black with grease and sawdust. "Mom, it's like magic," he'd said, eyes bright with wonder, turning plans into something real. By 24, he'd launched King Builds with a crew of locals, young Mia Torres fresh from trade school, veteran Raul Gomez who'd taught him framing techniques, old-timer Hank Ellis, who still remembered when Dre's father ran the hardware store. King restored the town hall's century-old facade, built custom homes on the edge of town, hired teenagers who needed summer work. Friday nights meant dinner at our Victorian on Elm Street, the wraparound porch where we'd watch fireflies dance while Dre grilled ribeyes. King brought craft beer from the brewery 2 towns over, and our lab buddy begged for scraps. 3 weeks before the arrest, Dre had raised his glass and said, "You know what I love most about this? We have everything. This completeness." King laughed, scratching Buddy's ears. "Dad's getting philosophical in his old age, Mom." "He's right, though," I'd said, leaning into Dre's shoulder. "We have a full life." I didn't notice his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, didn't question the late nights he claimed were inventory or the distant moods he blamed on supplier problems, didn't see the cracks forming in our foundation. Now sitting across from King in that sterile visiting room, watching him plead through plexiglass. "Mom, I was on site all day. Ask Mia, ask Raoul, ask Hank." I saw only truth in his eyes. The same truth I'd seen when he was 8 and swore he didn't break the lamp. And I'd discovered later it was the neighbour's baseball. He couldn't lie to save his life. But the evidence crushed us. The scarf. A loan for new equipment King needed. Payment due next month. Motive, they called it. Security footage so grainy you couldn't identify anyone, just someone his build. His crew's alibi falling apart when they admitted leaving for a supply run. The sight cameras conveniently malfunctioning that afternoon. Attorney Lila Voss arrived at our house 3 days later, recommended by an associate of Dre's. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, laying out the nightmare in clinical terms. Federal charges, Mrs. Larson. 20 years possible. We're looking at a minimum of $150,000 to mount a proper defense. Dre went pale beside me. That's our entire retirement fund. Then we use it, I said. Jessica, he's our son. He's guilty, Dre's voice cracked. Accept it. Take the plea deal. Stop dragging us down with him. But I couldn't. I sold the bonds my parents left me, cashed in life insurance policies, mortgaged Sweet Haven, the business I'd spent 20 years building. Each sacrifice drove another wedge between Dre and me. His accusations that I was ruining us, my growing realization that the man I married would abandon our child to save himself. I just didn't know yet that he'd done far worse than abandon King. He'd destroyed him. The 3 months leading to trial consumed me like a fever. I researched case law until 3 a.m., highlighting precedents in yellow marker while Dre slept, or pretended to sleep, in our bedroom. I rallied the community. Though half of Willow Creek had already convicted King in their minds, Mrs. Patterson brought casseroles but wouldn't meet my eyes. The church ladies stopped inviting me to prayer circle. Lila Voss was supposed to be our salvation. Instead, she was our executioner. She didn't challenge the chain of custody on the scarf, didn't call the forensics expert I'd found who could prove the evidence had been tampered with. When Mia, Raoul, and Hank took the stand to confirm King's whereabouts, she fumbled the questioning, let the prosecution shred their testimonies on cross-examination. What time exactly did you see King at the site? The prosecutor asked Mia. Around, I think 2:15. You think? Or you know? I'm not completely sure. Raoul couldn't remember if King had been wearing his work boots or sneakers. Hank admitted the cameras had been acting up for weeks. With each inconsistency, I watched the jury's faces harden like concrete setting. I sat in that courtroom every single day, remembering King at 7 years old, winning the science fair with a model bridge that held 200 pounds. King at 16, building a wheelchair ramp for our elderly neighbour without being asked. That boy, that good man, couldn't have done this. But Dre stopped coming after week 2. I can't watch this circus anymore, he said. I'd find him on the phone in his truck, conversation ending abruptly when I appeared. He pushed relentlessly for King to accept a plea deal, called me delusional, accused me of throwing away our future on a fantasy. The guilty verdict came on a Thursday. The jury foreman's voice was flat, emotionless. We find the defendant guilty on all counts. King's eyes found mine across the courtroom. He mouthed, "Love you, Mum." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The bailiffs led him away in chains while reporters shouted questions and camera flashes exploded like grenades. That night, the local news showed my bakery with a chyron reading, "Son of local baker, convicted in 1.8 m, embezzlement." By morning, someone had spray-painted "thief" across Sweet Haven's window. I came home to find Dre's truck gone and divorce papers on the kitchen counter. His note was brief, brutal. You chose a crook over us. I choose sanity. The divorce stripped me bare. Dre got the Victorian, our home for 23 years, because I'd mortgaged everything to pay Lila Voss. He took half of what little remained, leaving me with debts that swallowed my days. I moved into a studio apartment above the laundromat on 4th Street. The walls were thin enough to hear my neighbour's television through the night. I took a job waitressing at the truck stop off Route 42, working double shifts to afford gas for the 2-hour drive to Oak Ridge Prison every Wednesday. The woman who'd once taught Sunday school now served coffee to truckers who recognised me from the news and whispered behind their menus. Every week I sat across from King in that visiting room with its fluorescent lights and smell of industrial cleaner. We talked about nothing important, the weather, town gossip, whether the cafeteria food was edible, because talking about the truth hurt too much. His appeal had been denied, 20 years stretched ahead like a life sentence for both of us. My faith in justice had shattered. My marriage had crumbled. My savings were gone. But I still believed in my son's innocence, with the stubborn, irrational certainty that only a mother can possess. I just never imagined that belief would lead me to the truth in the form of a torn piece of cloth with 3 numbers stitched in blue thread. 6 months into King's sentence, our Wednesday visits had become a painful routine. I'd drive the 2 hours listening to the same country station, park in the same spot, sign the same clipboard. King looked hollower each week, cheekbones sharp, eyes distant, the light in him dimming like a candle burning down to nothing. We talked about safe things, weather, whether the Johnsons' granddaughter had her baby yet, the new stoplight on Main Street, anything but the 20 years stretching ahead. But this Wednesday felt different. King couldn't sit still. His eyes darted to the guards, to the cameras in the corners, back to me. His hands trembled as he leaned close to the plexiglass partition. "Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the din of other conversations. "Don't react to what I'm about to do." He slid something under the partition, a small scrap of fabric, blue thread visible even through the grime, part of his scarf. My scarf, the one that had condemned him. I started to speak, but he shook his head sharply. "Locker 528, old bus depot on Riverside. The key is under the fishing rock by the creek, you know the one. Where Dad taught me to skip stones." His voice cracked on the word, Dad. "It'll explain everything. The frame, why he left, all of it, but Mum, be careful, they're dangerous." "King, what are you—" "Trust me, please, and just go." The visit ended 2 minutes later. I clutched that piece of cloth all the way to my car, numbers stitched into the fabric, 5 and 28. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I drove to Willow Creek, to the creek where Dre had taught King to skip stones when he was 6, their laughter echoing across the water on summer afternoons that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. The rock was still there, moss-covered and half-buried in mud. I pried it up with shaking hands and found the key taped underneath, wrapped in plastic. The old bus depot had been abandoned for a decade, windows boarded, weeds claiming the parking lot. Inside smelled of rot and rust. Locker 528 was at the end of a row, its metal door hanging slightly crooked. The key turned. Inside, a manila envelope and a USB drive. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Bank statements for an account I'd never seen. Dre's name, $300,000 deposited 3 weeks before King's arrest. Source, Voss Investments. Text messages printed on paper, time-stamped and damning. Dre to Leela. Scarf planted at site. Cameras disabled. Ready to move. Lila to Dre. Ensure King's alone that afternoon. His crew needs to be gone. Dre to Leela. Jessica will pay for the defense. Drain her dry, then we split the fund and disappear. Lila to Dre. 20 years should be enough time for everyone to forget us. My legs gave out. I sat on the filthy floor, unable to breathe. The USB drive contained video files, security footage, unaltered, showing King at the construction site during the robbery, hammer in hand, framing a doorway. Photos of Dre with Elena Ruiz at a restaurant 3 weeks before her attack, leaning close, intimate. Audio of Dre threatening Mia. 40,000 or I'll make sure everyone knows about that theft charge you had sealed. Your choice. And finally, a video King had recorded secretly, his face haggard, voice breaking. "Mum, if you're watching this, I'm probably in jail." I didn't want to believe it, but Dad's been meeting with Lila for months. Not about our case, this started before. I found a burner phone in his truck, offshore account statements. "I'm so sorry I didn't tell you. I hoped I was wrong. I hope my father wasn't—" The video cut off. 27 years of marriage. Every kiss goodbye. Every whispered promise, every moment I'd trusted him, all of it a lie. Dre and Lila had framed our son, stolen from our town, destroyed our family so they could run away together with blood money. King was collateral damage. I was the fool who'd funded her own destruction. I drove straight to the FBI field office in Columbus, evidence clutched in my hands, my world burning down behind me. This time, someone would listen. Agent Marco Ruiz listened for 3 hours while I laid everything out on his desk. Bank statements, text messages, the USB drive with its damning footage. His face remained neutral, professional, but his fingers tightened on his pen with each new piece of evidence. "We'll verify everything," he said finally. "If this checks out, Mrs. Larson." It checked out. Within 48 hours, FBI agents arrested Dre at his sister's house in Kentucky and Lila at her downtown office, still billing clients she'd betrayed. Mia Torres collapsed during her interrogation, sobbing into her hands. He had evidence of a sealed theft charge from when I was 19. $40,000 or he'd ruin me. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know he'd use it to frame King. I thought it was just about the alibi timing." Elena Ruiz confessed from her hospital bed, shame etched into every word. $80,000 to stage the attack, hit myself with a paperweight. I was drowning in gambling debts. They said no one would get hurt, just insurance money, they called it. The offshore accounts told the complete story. $1.8 million, split between Dre and Lila, ready to wire to the Cayman Islands the moment King's appeal was denied. They let me watch Dre's confession through one-way glass. He sat in that interrogation room looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, handcuffs clinking against the metal table. "Why?" Agent Ruiz asked. "Jessica was happy with crumbs," Dre said, his voice flat, emotionless. 27 years in that town, baking bread and selling hammers like we were building something meaningful. Lila showed me we deserved more. Luxury, freedom, a real life. "And your son?" Dre's jaw tightened. "Necessary loss. He would have understood eventually. Or not. It didn't matter." I left before they finished. Some words once heard live in your bones forever. The nightmares started that week. Dreams of Dre's hands around my throat, his kiss poisoned. 27 years of breakfast conversations and shared pillows all contaminated by the rot beneath. How do you reconcile loving someone who destroyed everything you cherished? You don't. You just survive it. 8 weeks later, I stood outside Oak Ridge Prison while they processed King's release. The gates opened and he walked out in civilian clothes, jeans and the flannel shirt I'd brought him, looking stunned like he'd forgotten what sunlight felt like. "Mom," he whispered. And then we were holding each other, both of us crying too hard to speak. We drove home slowly, talking about rebuilding. King Builds would rise again. Sweet Haven would reopen. The community had already started a fundraiser, raising $30,000 to help me clear the mortgage. "Mia wants to apologize in person," King said quietly. "She stood by me through everything after she confessed. Wrote me letters every week. I know what Dad did to her, Mum. I don't blame her." Neither did I. Victims come in many forms. Today, a year later, we have Friday dinners again. Different house, smaller porch. But King and Mia, his fiancée now, ring glinting on her finger, come every week with craft beer and stories about the homes they're building together. Our lab buddy passed during the trial, but we adopted a rescue named Hope, who begs for steak scraps just like he did. Dre got 18 years. Lila got 22. I don't visit. I don't write. Some doors once closed should stay that way. I lost everything defending my son. My savings, my marriage, my faith in the man I loved. But I gained something precious, the knowledge that truth, no matter how buried, eventually finds light. That love, when it's real, doesn't calculate the cost. King's freedom, our bond forged stronger in fire. These things are priceless. If this story moved you, share it. Comment below about times you chose what was right over what was easy. Subscribe for more tales of betrayal, resilience, and triumph. Because the truth always matters even when it breaks your heart.